me just all right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good evening to everyone who is in Malaysia and Indonesia. And if you're from other parts of the world, good afternoon, or maybe even a good morning if you are coming from certain parts of the world. Today is our last session, and we will be wrapping up our discussion on the intro to FIE. For the last 2 weeks and for today's class, we will be focusing on answering the question how to develop Islamic economics. Just a brief recap of what we were doing in the last 2 weeks. Among other things, we were talking about, and this is connected to even the discussion in weeks 1, 2, and so on. Islam is a complete way of life, and therefore it provides guidance for economics. Okay? And this guidance, we connected it to the meaning of Sharia. Sharia is basically the guidance that Allah has revealed, and therefore this Sharia gives guidance also for economics. And just as a passing comment, we did also mention that we need to look at the Sharia not just as a legal code, but the Sharia is meant to also guide us in terms of giving us principles, norms, values. Yeah. So we want to get guidance for economics from the Sharia, but it is not going to be directly getting all the do's and the don'ts from the Quran and the Sunnah. Therefore, we have to derive the meaning. We have to interpret the sources of knowledge in order for us to be able to get guidance for economics, right? And I gave the example, of course, Sharia, fiqh, and usul fiqh. But in this case, we are talking about Sharia, and then when we interpret the Sharia, we actually want to develop economics, right? And the way we develop economics, we need to have a methodology. And so we propose the term usul al-iqtisad. Yeah? That means a methodology for us to develop economics. And I think somebody asked, why are we using the term? Well, we just want to distinguish between the social science that we are talking about. Economics is a social science. We want to distinguish it from fiqh, because fiqh has been interpreted to mean law, right? So the usul for law may not necessarily be 100% the same as the usul for economics. All right, so we need to develop a methodology as well. All right. We then last week we said that when we want to develop Islamic economics, the way to develop Islamic economics is through what we talked about, the integration of knowledge agenda. We want to integrate between Turath as well as modern knowledge. Okay, and because the Turath is also having certain time and space constraints, and because modern knowledge is also having certain foundational issues because of the process of secularization, therefore, both of these two inputs, we need to have critical evaluation, and then we integrate the two, all right? So we talked about this diagram that represented, let me share with you, maybe it will be better if I share this. Let me try to get this, where is the sharing? Okay, this, okay, we talked about this um, integration between Turath and modern knowledge in order for us to develop contemporary Islamic economics. When we say Turath, it has two components, the substantive knowledge as well as the methodological knowledge. So we have in our Turath certain scholars who have talked about, say, fiqh. And then in order for us to understand the fiqh, we have to be able to understand the methodology they used in order to come up with their opinions. Similarly, in modern knowledge, we have all the different writings in economics, but we must also understand the methodology that they used in order to come up with that economics. Okay, so for both Turath and for modern knowledge, they have substantive knowledge, the theories, and then they have the methodology used in order to develop the theories, right? And of course, the Turath methodology has got one element that is very different from modern knowledge, and that is the Quran and maybe to a certain extent the Sunnah. Although Professor Alatas, when he talks about the Quran and the Sunnah, he puts it also as part of what he calls true narrative. Quran is a true narrative. Of course, in Islamic, in our epistemology, Quran is the absolute word of Allah. So the level of the hierarchy of the source of knowledge is different. But in modern economics, in modern sciences, they also acknowledge true narrative, authority. But their authority is at the level of scholarship, of scholars. So for example, if we want to talk about modern economics today, they will refer to the works of Adam Smith. They will refer to the work of John Maynard Keynes, right, when they develop modern economics. This is their authority. In our case, besides our scholars, for example, we may talk about Najatullah Siddiqui, we may talk about Ibn Khaldun. Yeah, these are scholars. But we also have the Sunnah, the Hadith, and we have Quran. All right. So our Turath has got this which modern knowledge doesn't have. But what we have in modern knowledge doesn't mean we throw it away. We want to utilize, except that we have to critically evaluate. So I put at the bottom there, this is a task for the Islamic economic academics or scholars. We have to decide what we take from the Turath, what we take from modern knowledge. How much we can take from Turath, how much we can take from modern knowledge, and how to integrate, right? This is the challenge that we face when we want to develop Islamic economics. How do we combine or integrate between what we have in our Quran, in our Sunnah, in the works of scholars? How do we integrate that when we want to develop models and theories, right? So this is what we've been doing in the last two classes. We've been trying to talk about those issues. What about today? So as I mentioned last week, we just want to focus on theory building, right? And I just want to say that, before we talk about the process of theory building, it's important for us to ask this question. Yeah? What is the purpose of theory? And I'm asking this question because depends on how you answer this question. In modern economics, they talk about theory as having at least three purposes, yeah? three objectives. Nearly everybody will say we use theory in order to describe human behavior. Right? So theory building is a process of description. You want to describe. People will also say that we want to predict human behavior. And this is actually the main purpose of theory in our mainstream neoclassical economics. The purpose of theory is to make predictions. Right? But not everybody gives emphasis on prediction. For example, institutionalist school of economics, their focus is not so much for prediction, but they want to actually understand human behavior. What are the patterns that exist in order to have certain behavior, right? This is institutionalist purpose of theory or models. So the answer to this question is very important for Islamic economics. What is the purpose of theory in Islamic economics? I will agree that it is definitely we want to describe, we want to explain what we see in society. So it is a description of what is happening, for sure. But do we take prediction as a very, very sole, the only goal of economics like neoclassical economics? I would think that in Islamic economics, understanding human behavior is also very important, right? Now, what is so important about distinguishing prediction from understanding? The reason why we want to know this is connected to the approach and the tools that we use, right? For all of you who are economists or studying economics, you will realize that in your economics program or in your courses that you have done in economics, whenever you come to the curriculum, there will be courses on business math or economic maths for economics. There will be statistics, there will be econometrics, there will be maybe mathematical economics, right? And what you study in these courses, they are very quantitative tools. Yeah? For example, calculus is used a lot in economics. In our textbooks that we study, that we use, they use calculus, right? They ask you to take dy over dx. And then when they want to answer the problem of consumption or the problem of production, they will use calculus in order to find the maximum point, right? The maximum point. So calculus is a tool that is very useful when we want to find maximum. And how do you solve the equation? You say dy dx equal to 0, right? And you will be able to differentiate the equation and you get a precise point. So the producer will maximize profit where MR equals MC, and there will be a certain point. This is the point you stop production. Because if you continue to produce, you will no longer maximize profit anymore. So the goal of the producer is to maximize profit. So the tools that we are using is in order to predict what is the output that maximizes profit. All right. Now, if you are an institutionalist, that may not be important to you. You are not so interested to find out what is the output level that maximizes your profit. You are more interested in understanding what makes the person behave like this, or what combination of institutions will be creating certain patterns of behavior. That means if you have this, you have this, you have this, then you get this pattern. So you are more interested in finding out patterns of human behavior. That means your tools are not necessarily going to be focusing on calculus, exact point. It's not your interest. Okay. Now I'm giving this example because we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of theory in Islamic economics? Okay, because that will also determine the tools that we use. Today in economics, of course, sometimes now we don't even talk about calculus anymore, right? The economics of today, we use a lot of computer programs. They are talking about simulation programs that have even a higher level of abstraction and so on, right? So important for us to know what is the purpose of theory or model building. And keep that in mind. Okay, now when we talk about building models and theories in Islamic economics, in a way, as I mentioned just now, it is like the stages involved in fiqh. I'm using fiqh in a very wide meaning. Fiqh means literally understanding. So I want to understand the Sharia. I want to apply it to economics. Okay, so when I'm building models, when I'm building economic theory, it is a process of producing a kind of detailed application of Sharia to economics. Right? Now, what does it involve? You look at any standard economic textbook, chapter 1, or maybe sometimes chapter 2, they will tell you there are 4 to 5 steps. Depending on what book, they will give you different number of steps. But generally, this is how they will explain model building, right? Firstly, you decide what is your subject matter or the area that you want to investigate, right? Now, let's give for this example for today's session that we want to talk about consumer behavior. Okay, consumer behavior. So that is the area that you want to investigate. And therefore, the next step in building model will be you identify what are the variables that are involved in consumer behavior or theory of demand, right? Now, we are, of course, very lucky because we don't start from zero. We got textbooks. The textbooks already have theory of demand or theory of consumer behavior. So we will already have this equation. The demand of X is a function of X, function of what, a price of X, price of Y, income level, your taste, right? And maybe a few other factors. So we don't start from zero because in modern economics, they already give you certain variables. The dependent variable is the demand for X, and then the independent variables are all the others. So you already have some knowledge. But if you were starting from zero, so there could be certain areas in economics that we don't have any theory, right? So you need to develop the tentative relationship. So we already know, for example, demand for X, the relationship to the price of X is a negative relationship. The higher the price of X, the lower the quantity demanded of X, right? But if you didn't know this, then you have to introspect yourself. Yeah? One way of doing it is you will ask yourself, what will I do, or what will happen to my demand for something if the price of that product goes up? And so you will introspect tentative relationship. You will say, I think when the price goes up, I probably will buy less. Yeah? So you will develop a tentative relationship, and then you will test hypothesis. Okay, but as far as we are concerned, we don't have to go through that because there's a lot of theory already that has been developed over the last 250 years. This is why I said we don't need to throw away everything in modern economics. All right. So once you have this tentative relationship, you have certain model. The model will have assumptions. They will have hypotheses, and then you will need to test. In modern economics, and this is a very important point, in modern economics today, empirical testing has become almost the only valid way to test your hypothesis. Okay, so you develop tentative theory, then you test certain hypotheses to see whether or not that theory is acceptable or not. Okay, if you're testing, when you test the hypothesis, the test of the behavior of people are in line with your theory. Okay, you keep testing, and every time you keep testing, it confirms your hypothesis, So finally, you will be confident that your hypothesis is correct, and therefore this becomes now building blocks for your theory. So from model, you go to theory. All right. Now, what if you develop your tentative hypothesis, your tentative theory, you test the hypothesis, and then the test does not correspond to your hypothesis. In other words, the what is does not support your what should be. Okay, then you have to do certain things. You have to make modifications. All right. Now, this is the general standard economics process that we follow. Let's give an example for Islamic economics. All right. Now, let's say we want to talk about consumer behavior. All right. So we are going to talk about the demand for, let's say, certain goods. All right. So you will ask yourself, what are the variables that determine demand? So as I said just now, one of it is price of X. And you ask yourself what you will do if the price of X goes up and all other factors remain the same. So you may come to the conclusion there is a negative relationship between demand of X and price of X. Then you will also ask, what are the other factors? Not only price of X, price of Y, income level, right? You will look at other people's behavior, not only your own. Introspection, you ask yourself, but you may also make observation, or you may even ask other people, what will you do when the price of X goes up, right? So you gather information. Finally, you will come to that equation, yeah? Function, a demand of X is a function of price of X, price of Y, income, etc. Okay, so this is standard economics. We have no problem with that from Islamic point of view. Ask yourself, ask other people, observe what other people do. This is all acceptable means of acquiring knowledge. All right. Now, what is different in Islamic economics is we also have to refer to Quran and Sunnah. Okay. So now, when we refer to the Quran and the Sunnah and the views of scholars, past and present, we modify the vision. Example, besides price of X, price of Y, income, taste, we also now, from our Quran, from the Hadith, we know that we have something in Islamic economics called the importance of halal and haram. So meaning to say, when we consume, only the halal is consumed. Then we also know about the basic needs, the daruriyats. Yeah, the spelling is wrong in that sentence. Yeah, the daruriyat, the hajiyat, the tahsiniyat. We also know that we shouldn't consume extravagantly, israf. We shouldn't waste, yeah, tabthir. Yeah, these are all the values that we are going to now add into our demand for a certain good or service, right? So we use modern knowledge, but we also now add certain values into our analysis of consumer behavior, all right? Now, from this, we want to do hypothesis. So we have to have tentative theory. There are certain assumptions, there are certain hypotheses, and then we want to test, right? One of the example that we are going to put in our assumptions of the model will be only halal goods consumed, because this is what you get from the Quran. Yeah, Allah is saying or talking about the halal and the haram. Right? So you come up with certain assumptions and hypotheses in your model, and one of them will be that the goods that you consume are only halal. This becomes the what should be, right? Tentative theory is the what should be. Then you have a hypothesis, you test. Okay? You test hypotheses. In modern economics, they do empirical studies to get the what is. Now, let's say straight away, one big difference between Islamic economics and modern economics is empirical testing is not the only authority. We have, for example, the values and the norms that you find in Quran, in Hadith. This is also a very important criteria to know whether or not what you are doing is right or not. So it's not all only about empirical testing. Not everything needs to be tested empirically. Some things may not be empirically tested. Okay, but we want to use empirical studies also in economics because it is important for us to understand what people are doing. We have a certain what should be. If we are confident about this what should be, we want to see whether people out there are also following the what should be. Okay, so let's go to the steps. When you conduct the empirical study, if the empirical test verify the hypothesis, or in terminology they will say we don't verify, we do not falsify yet. Yeah, so this is the debate between verification and falsification, yeah, which in methodology is one of those debating points. But if the empirical tests confirm your what should be, and then they are repeated, still confirm, ultimately become building blocks, okay, accepted. If the empirical tests do not support the hypothesis, what do you do? Modern economics will say, well, there's not 6 steps, there's only 3 steps before this. All the aspects, 1, 2, 3, you have to recheck. For anybody who has done empirical work, you know that the process of checking your data is very important. Sometimes you make mistakes, very simple mistake. When you are coding, you code wrongly. When you transfer the data from the empirical test into your computer program, you transfer wrongly. Question 5 goes to question 6, right? So all these kind of things you have to check again. You wouldn't know unless the empirical test gave you a funny answer, didn't support you, then you check all the steps, right? You make sure photocopy the questionnaire supposed to have 10 pages. You make sure that all the questionnaire has 10 pages. Yeah, this is very basic testing, right? You recheck all the steps. This is rechecking technicalities. But don't forget, you also need to recheck your understanding of the Islamic guidance. All right. Now, let me give an example. We said just now one of your hypotheses or assumptions will be only the halal is consumed. Why? Because you are referring to Quran. Quran is talking about the halal. Halal is consumed. Haram is to be avoided. So when you develop your consumer theory, you will assume that only halal is consumed. Okay. So let's say you carry out a survey and you find out that there are people who are consuming haram. So now your consumer model, something is wrong because your tentative theory said only halal, but when you do your empirical work, haram is also being consumed. No, what do? You will recheck all your steps. Did you do the survey correctly? Did you collect the data correctly, etc.? You will do all of that. But then you must also look at your hypothesis. Is it right or not? Only halal goods consumed, and now you got haram goods consumed. You will need to modify your hypothesis because why? There could be non-Muslims in the sample, and maybe the non-Muslim is consuming something which is haram. If that is the case, then you modify your hypothesis, the problem is solved. Only halal goods consumed by Muslims. Now you recheck, yeah, test again. If the new interpretation or new hypothesis is confirmed, you have solved your problem. All right? But maybe, no, the haram is consumed by Muslim, not non-Muslim. Okay, so you have improved the hypothesis, but it is still having problem. Okay, now you have to go back again and check, is that the correct understanding? Can there be any other reason why a Muslim is consuming haram? So maybe there is, for example, let's say in this case, riba. Yeah, Muslims are going to riba finance, and this goes against your model because riba is haram. Okay, so you may think that it is the non-Muslim, but it is not the non-Muslim. It is the Muslim who is patronizing riba-based bank. What can you? How do you modify your hypothesis? Maybe there's no alternative. Maybe the person has to go to this one particular bank because he or she is in a state of emergency, daruriyat. So you have to modify the hypothesis again, right? In order to take care of all these possible reasons why somebody is consuming haram. Right? Maybe the person is ignorant. He doesn't know riba is haram. So you have to take that into consideration. Now, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is the process of model building requires you to recheck, modify, improve your hypothesis so that it is able to explain, to describe, and to understand what is happening in society. Muslims are consuming riba because they are ignorant, or because there is no alternative, or because they have to. Okay, these are all real situations. All right. Now, for each one of these, at the end of the day, you will modify your hypothesis. But at the end of the day, you come to a point where you cannot change your hypothesis anymore. Let's say at the end of our empirical testing, you come to the point there are Muslims consuming riba, that means involved in riba, and there is no reason for them to do it. In other words, we have provided alternative, there is an alternative, it is not daruriyat, it is just they are doing it. So what do we do? Then the role of economists is now to prescribe. Yeah? What do you use economics for? Describe, analyze, understand, and then we also want to prescribe. What do we want to prescribe? We want to prescribe policies to change the behavior of the human being so that the what is conforms to the what should be. All right. So basically, how to deal with the what is, if it is different from the what ought to be, recheck the process, check whether our understanding is correct, because maybe when you build the model, you are not having the total understanding. So you have to read different scholars, you have to read different example. Maybe in a certain country, there are certain reasons why something is happening. All right. So you have to understand. You have to modify the hypothesis. You continue to do this until you cannot change the hypothesis anymore. Then we need to think if we have to change the what is. Okay. So one big thing that we do in economics is we actually put forward policies to change the behavior of people. Now, when we give this example, especially when we talk about the halal and the haram, some people may say, oh, this is not science. Yeah, this is not academic discipline. This is indoctrination. This is like you are trying to force people to conform. Yeah. Now, nobody can deny every year when fiscal policy is announced, right? So in Malaysia, in October, the government will announce budget 2021. And in that budget, one of the things that always happens is certain goods will have increase in tax. Certain goods, they may give incentive, they may subsidize. What is the purpose of all of this? It is to change the behavior of people, right? So in economics, it is already normal. In economic policy, your role is to change the behavior of people. Let me give an example that all of us can relate to. We had COVID-19, MCO, and therefore a lot of people not buying goods and services. Businesses are going out of business. What did the government do? Introduce certain recovery package, all right? And then giving all kinds of incentive. What is the purpose of doing all of this? The government wants to change the behavior of people. Previously, we were not buying certain goods. Now the government is saying, we give you all this incentive. Do this, do this, do this. Trying to change our behavior. Every time the tax on cigarettes goes up. Why? Among other things, they want people to stop smoking, to reduce the demand. So if anybody says that what you are trying to do in Islamic economics is not economics, but it is dogma, it is ideology, I think it is not right, because economics has a policy dimension. Okay, so I think we have come to the end of our discussion. Just a very, very brief recap. When we talk about the model building and theory building process, it is important for us to understand what is the purpose of economic theory. Now, Islamic economics, I'm sure we want to describe behavior. We want to understand behavior. Maybe we also want to predict. Although I would argue from Islamic point of view, maybe prediction is also not the main purpose, right? Now, if that is the case, I think Islamic economics will also have quite an open view about qualitative research methods, not only quantitative. Yeah? Modern economics, neoclassical economics, is very much biased towards the quantitative methods and very, very precise models. Yeah? And I think all of us know it because we have to go through these courses. Islamic economics, yes, we may use quantitative methods, but I think we will also be quite open to qualitative methods. All right. So with this, maybe brief, I hope we have enough time to listen to some questions from those who are here today. Please, I welcome your queries.
Thank you so much, Prof. I think this is a very good series ending to our 7 series. Now we really put our hand dirty on economics for all theoretical now. Okay, we look for question. I know brother Afrat asking once in the beginning. Anyone want to ask live?
There is a question from Nuruddin related to prescriptive. I think in mainstream economy, they also do it. Yeah, you are right. Advertising and various other economic seductions, such as creation of clothing, fashion, aim to influence. You are right. I mean, I'm totally in agreement. That's why anyone who says that what you want to do in Islamic economics is not science, but it is it is dogma. Economics, we do it all the time, right? Advertising, you want to sell certain product, you try to convince people to change their behavior, right? So I don't see a big difference between what we are trying to do in Islamic economics compared to what, you know, other schools of economics try to do. Only thing is, in our case, we want to use economic policy to Islamize the behavior. We want people to come closer to the Sharia, and what the Sharia says should be our economic behavior. So, you know, if people say that is wrong, then, well, anything is wrong. You are trying to change the behavior of people, especially if the people say they are Muslims, then they should be following Islam. Right? And therefore, you are using your sources of knowledge to change that. Can we integrate the institutional economic principles under Islamic economics well? Well, you know, there is a group, I don't know if it is still functioning, but a few years ago, we had a few scholars who tried to develop institutional economics for Islamic economics, right? IIIT, something like that. So they were very much interested to talk about Islamic economics from an institutional economics perspective. And I think, to me, there is a lot that we can learn from institutional economics, because Islamic economics also, the approach, I think, will have a lot of similarity, because we also take institutions to be very important. Now, when we say institutions, please don't think about Islamic Bank or Islamic University, or this is not what we mean by institution. Institution means accepted norm in society. Yeah. So, for example, when we say Islamic economics is giving emphasis on contracts, so contracts are an institution. Whenever we want to transact, we are supposed to have certain reference to contract. So a contract is an institution, right? Or if I want to say that in Islamic economics, cooperation is very important. Cooperation is an institution, right? So we're not talking about the physical institution. We are talking about institutions as accepted norms. The only thing is, we have to translate that institution into reality. So if I say cooperation, I must be able to show how this cooperation is translated into my economic dealing. Right? So I have to write a contract between two parties that promote cooperation. Yeah. So basically, I just translate my institution into practice. What is exactly Islamic economic scholars doing to develop more features of Islamic economics? Because we hope to be the way out to the world. Okay. Well, Islamic economic scholars are doing as I suppose as much as they can do. I do believe that sometimes we don't have enough people in certain areas of economics. We have too many people maybe in the area of banking and finance. We need to have more people in economics. We need to have more people in the area of Islamic economic theory. We need to have more people in the area of Islamic economic philosophy, right? Because unless you develop these areas, theory and philosophy, it is very difficult for you to claim that what you are doing is Islamic economics. So we must build, we must build the theoretical base. Why are we not having enough people going into theory? Well, we need to provide funding to do research in these areas. You know, and I mean, I suggested many years ago that you know, we should have certain what is the word they use, moral suasion. If any of you are in economics, you know, we say the central bank has got a very important function besides doing monetary policy and so on, they can persuade the banks to do certain things, right? They don't make it a rule, but so maybe we need to persuade all banks and corporate entities to put some money into a fund in order to support the development of Islamic economic theory or Islamic economic philosophy. Because if you don't give the funds, nobody will have incentive to go into these areas, right? So this is what I thought we can do. How do you explain Adam Smith's concept of invisible hand in relation to new Islamic economics model? You know, Adam Smith actually was a very brilliant person. Although some of his ideas, people say actually they were his teachers, it was actually the teachers' ideas. But Adam Smith was able to put it together and also at the right time. Sometimes people have good ideas, but wrong time. Yeah? And when it's the wrong time, people cannot appreciate. Right? So Adam Smith came really at the right time. The ideas he took from different scholars, and he brought this idea of invisible hand. Very interesting. I think I mentioned this quotation to you in our discussion about the benevolence of the baker and the butcher, right? So Adam Smith was reflecting on the people of Britain in the 18th century. So when he tried to explain what he saw, he came with his vision of consumption, of production, right? And for Islamic economics, if we had looked at Muslim society at that same time, we may have had a very different description of society. Why? Because society is based on the values of that people, right? So the values of people in Britain were based on the values of British society. 1776, already the secularization process has taken place. Science is becoming more dominant. Religion is declining. Yeah? Physics is becoming a very important science, and therefore everybody wants to emulate the methods and approach of physics. And so that is what Adam Smith promoted in his writings. And, you know, the Western powers became dominant all over the world. And therefore this view also came to the Muslim world. Right? So we have to revive our foundations. We have to re-understand our ability to, you know, how we can develop the right kind of understanding of the Islamic economic vision. Is invisible hand something that we accept from Islamic point of view? Well, provided you have all the good assumptions about human beings, then the invisible hand may be able to work, right? That means you have people who understand, they are very morally upright, they don't want to take advantage of other people, they have justice within them. If you have this kind of people, maybe the invisible hand can work. But I think it is very unrealistic for us to think that people behave like this. So that is why in Islamic economics, we do have a particular role for the state. There is a role for the state. So we don't depend totally on individual, yeah, doing whatever they want to do. Any comment on Muhammad Akram Khan's writing on methodology of Islamic economics? Testing the understanding of fiqh. Well, I'm not sure. When you say Akram Khan's writing on methodology, Akram Khan has changed his opinion quite substantially. What he wrote in the 80s and what he wrote in his recent work in 2013 or was it 14. But as far as methodology is concerned, I think he is quite consistent. He kept on saying that inductive methodology is the method of Islamic economics. I don't know why we have to choose between inductive and deductive. To me, modern economics has shown that both deductive and inductive logic is there. When you read the Quran, there are some deductive statements. When you read the Quran, there are some inductive statements. So I would think both of these are acceptable. Our Muslim scholars in the past, they developed istinbat, and I'm not sure the term for inductive is, so both were there, right? So I would have thought that there is no need for us to have either or. Islamic economics has, Islamic scholarship has always used various kinds of, deductive and inductive logic. So if you look at the way the different fiqh schools use akal, right? One madhab talks about istihsan. Another madhab will say istislah. And another madhab will say istishab. So you have different way of reasoning, and they include inductive as well as deductive. So I would be open to it being more, to be more accommodating rather than it must be inductive. The products of the product development of bank, is this the work of banker or Islamic economists? Well, I'm quite sure it's not the work of Islamic economists. It's probably the work of the banker and getting the approval of the Sharia committee. So if you have an Islamic economist who is a Sharia board member, then the Islamic economist is involved. Yeah? But I think most of the time we may not have Islamic economists, as Sharia board members. There could be some, but not many. Do you think we lack experts in Islamic economics? Do you think teaching Islamic economics to undergraduate is a way? Bachelor is a way? Yes, I have no problem. It can be done at bachelor level. How do we build in general the teaching between conventional and Islamic economics within 3-4 years? This is a very good question. Let me give you my own experience. When we joined IIUM in the early 80s, we were told that we had to do 130 credit hours or something like that. For Malaysia, 130 or 132 is on the high side. I think in Indonesia, you have even more than that. But in Malaysia, generally, people do 120 credit hours. But we did 132. And not only that, we have to study not only conventional economics, we have to study Islamic perspective, we have to study Quran, Sunnah, we have to study Arabic. And so many students used to, complain and say that, how can we do all of this? The time is only limited, 3 to 4 years. And I remember our dean at that time was the Syed Osman Al-Habshi. He said, this is the challenge of Islamic economics, right? You have to work harder. You have to push yourself harder so that you are not only getting knowledge of modern economics, but you are also getting knowledge of the Torah. So we take it as a challenge, right? There are some universities, Islamabad, for example, they also had Islamic university. They have Islamic university still there. I remember their program was very ambitious. The student have to do maybe 5 years to get first degree. And then even more ambitious is a university in Iran. Their first degree, student had to spend 6-7 years. So very ideal. You want to do a lot of things in your bachelor, but if you put it 6 years, then you are going to face trouble. Students will not want to come and do your program. Yeah. So you have to balance. You have to balance between the demand that you make within the 3 to 4 year period and how much you can achieve. So this is why I think don't expect miracles in 3 or 4 years undergraduate. For majority of students, once they do 4 years economics, they go out and they work in the industry. But for those who are interested to improve their knowledge, then they come and do masters. For those who are more interested, they come and do PhD. Right? So we bachelor program must be for majority of people. Right? But then you may then go into more detail in masters and PhD. Any comments for Dr. Asad Zaman? I have great respect for Dr. Asad. He is a very prolific writer. He has written a lot of articles. And he is also somebody who has produced so many videos. And so if you go to his blog, you will find a lot of writings. And generally, I'm very sympathetic to what he's saying. I only, maybe the one thing that I don't agree with him is, I don't agree that we have to throw out this conventional economics. Yeah, he is very, very strong on this point. He says we should throw out neoclassical economics. There is nothing we need to learn from it. I don't agree with him. I believe Islamic methodology doesn't stop you from getting access to knowledge from all sources, but you have to critically evaluate it, right? So maybe this is maybe the only main point that I don't agree with him. What about Marxist economics? Do they belong to institutionalists? No, Marxist economics, I think, is a totally different school. And they come from a very, very different base, foundation. If you're talking about Marxist theory, the one issue that maybe we have a big problem with Marxist ideology is that they believe it is the economic mode of production that determines everything else, including religion. So if you take this view, it's very difficult for you to accept the idea that revelation is coming from Allah and revelation is affecting your economics. Yeah. So in the Marxist view, it is the economics that determines your religion, which I suppose is not an easy thing for us to accept from Islamic point of view, right? I'm sure they have their own methodology, but I have to confess I'm not an expert in Marxist approach to economics. In fact, most of us don't know much about Marxist economics because our societies are not necessarily Marxist. Most of our societies in the Muslim world, they are probably capitalist in basic structure. There could be some that have a socialist orientation, but Marxist, I'm not too sure. Yeah, in fact, there were some colleagues in IIUM. They come from the Russian republics, and some of these Russian republics are Muslims basically. So they have a better understanding of the economy that is being talked about from Marxist point of view. Is there any country that adheres to Islamic economic system? I don't think there is any country that can 100% say that they have an Islamic economic system. There are quite a few countries that say they have Islamic financial system. I think Iran and Sudan, they claim that their banking or financial system is 100% Islamic. Okay, but I think for the economic system, there is no country that can claim that they have 100% Islamic system. It's not easy because economics cannot be separated from law, cannot be separated from politics. And therefore, if you want to talk about Islamic economic system, you must also talk about politics, you must also talk about society, you must also talk about law. And that is not easy. Yeah. experiment of Islamization of economics in the Pakistani context? To what extent was the Islamization attempt in the era of Ziaul Haq? Well, 1970s was, of course, the time of the development of contemporary Islamic economics. And a few countries were attempting to bring Islamic economic reforms. One of them was Pakistan. In fact, Pakistan probably one of the earliest countries to try to promote Islamic economics and Islamic banking. And it was during the time of Ziaul Haq. Right? So certainly there were some reforms that were done. The approach in Pakistan, to a certain extent, was also an attempt to introduce Islamic economics by legal reform. So, for example, yesterday the banks were riba-based banks. They pass a law. Tomorrow, all the banks are Islamic banks. Okay, by law. Personally, I don't think that this is a very sustainable approach. And I think the example is shown in Pakistan that despite they approach their Islamization through the legal reforms, but it is found that the people in the banking industry, they didn't understand Islamic banking. And so just to say that they are Islamic banks, but the practice continues or seems to be not doing the things that they're supposed to do. And then they finally realize that, they cannot do it by law. And that is why I'm a little bit more inclined to what we are doing in many other countries, where the reform is gradual. Yeah? Gradual reform. You need to not only put Islamic economics in law in the bank, but you need to develop it in the hearts of people. Yeah? So I think during the talk on Abu Ala Maududi, we mentioned that his approach was very effective because not only he talked about law, about economics, but he talked about the hearts of people. So you try to change people from within. Yeah? So there are pros and cons. I think that's maybe the short answer. How do you see experimental economics? I think this is a very good way forward. I think I mentioned it in one of the classes. The use of simulation techniques, very important. There is a book written by Dr. Sami Suwailam, who is now the acting Director General of IIIT. He has written a book on what is it called? Chaos, complexity theory. Yeah? Complexity theory. So for those of you who are interested in this, please read it. It's not easy reading, but if some of you are able to understand chaos and complexity theory, I think you can benefit quite a lot from the approach. Can we say mixed economy is close to it? Yeah, of course. When you say mixed, we mean usually we're talking about market plus state, right? Yeah. So definitely Islamic economics would be a mixed economy from the point of view of capitalism and socialism. What is the title of the book? I'm not sure what book. What book are you? Of Sami Suwailam. Yeah, I don't remember the full title, but it has something to do with complexity theory and Islamic economics. So if you go to IIIT website, they have all their books online, and I think you are able to download many of the books. So go into their website, go to their book publications, and try to find the book by Dr. Sami, Complexity Theory and Islamic Economics. Something.
Okay, Prof.
Okay, so I think maybe we have come to the end of our 7 sessions. I look forward to hearing your comments. Maybe you can continue to put it in the chat. And I think because after this, we will need to sit down and see how we can take it forward and how to improve, what we are doing. Can we have full courses, or do we have any other mode? Yeah, we need to see how we can improve our communication to those who would like to learn more about Islamic economics. Yeah, so with that, so somebody has, the Nuruddin has already given the topic, Islamic economics in a complex world, explorations in agent-based simulation. So that is the book, and you can download it from the chat here. Alhamdulillah. So if there is nothing else, thank you all for staying with us. Today, the last class, we have about 80 participants, which is a big number. Inshallah, we will meet again.
Next session, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, thank you so much, Prof. Prof. Aslam has been passionate in teaching Islamic economics since the beginning. He and other friend has co-authored or co-edited the book Teaching Islamic Economics in Southeast Asia. So this is a collection of I think 12 or 13 articles, papers on how we teach economics in different universities. And Prof. Aslam and the colleague conducted workshop in Indonesia, Malaysia, of course, Thailand, just to encourage lecturers and academics, of course, then how they can improve. Inshallah, Prof, we always pray for you. Inshallah, we'll sit down.
We hope to restart the program. I'm not sure whether we are able to do it face to face, but certainly online is possible. But we want to restart again.
This workshop, you mean, our teaching?
Yeah, the workshops on teaching of Islamic economics.
Okay, we'll sit down with Prof. We will start again our next session in August and September. How best we can approach, but our main objective is to help our other lecturers in other universities when they are teaching some economics and use this recorded session as one of the material. Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.